Which form of Sukuna do you think is stronger? I want you to think of your answer now and remember it because I'm going to ask you that same question at the end of the video. Because I think that although a lot of people have their answers, some of you may have thought, well, it's a no-brainer that current Sukuna is stronger than Megami Sukuna. He uses the world slash, has extra arms, and even a mouth on his stomach to chant. But some other people think that it is obvious that Megami Sukuna is stronger because, well, he has access to Maharaga, who can adapt to any and all phenomena. So with an ability like that, how can you ever really lose? I have looked over a bunch of things throughout the Gojo fight, recent chapters, and have spoken to a couple of people about this topic, and I have to outright say that the question about which form is stronger is not an easy question to answer. There are very good arguments for both sides, and after I give you the arguments for both sides, I want you to tell me your answer on which form of Sukuna is stronger, and at the same time, I'll give my answer as well. And I have to specify exactly what each of these forms actually means and what they can do in these forms. So when I say Megami Sukuna, we're going to be taking the Sukuna throughout the entire Gojo fight where he was using the Ten Shadows abilities. So he won't have access to Shrine because, well, you can't use two techniques at the same time. You either have to use one technique, then wait and use another, but you can't use two techniques simultaneously. And we're going to be taking the Maharaga, Ten Shadows Sukuna, because Maharaga is what Sukuna used the entire fight in order to actually beat Gojo. And for this comparison, Sukuna also in his Megami form won't have access to the World Slash, as he was only able to actually pull off this World Slash at the very end of the fight, and he no longer had access to the Ten Shadows technique, and he also was not able to use Domain Expansion. So for me to take that form of Sukuna, we would have to exclude Ten Shadows and Domain, and that wouldn't be fair. So just for clarity, Megami Sukuna in this comparison will be the Sukuna who used the Ten Shadows technique for the overwhelming majority of the fight against Gojo. And it is also very important to remember that Sukuna was not able to use any of his Shrine abilities while he was also using Maharaga's adaptation, because you can't use two curse techniques at the same time. So this comparison will be the Ten Shadows Sukuna from the Gojo fight and the current Sukuna that we see now, where he uses the Shrine abilities along with the World Slash. So in which form is Sukuna stronger? When he's using the Ten Shadows technique and he's inside of Megami's body, or when he's using his Shrine abilities in the World Slash in his current body now? Now it's time to take a deep dive into what each Sukuna brings to the table and compare the abilities. Let's start off with seeing how strong Sukuna was when he was inside Megami's body using the Ten Shadows technique. So here is everything that Sukuna can do when he is in Megami's body using the Ten Shadows abilities. We know that he has the ability to actually move through the shadows, which is something that I don't see many people talk about because we only saw Sukuna do it once in his fight with Gojo. We see when Gojo is flying through the air, Sukuna actually pops up behind him, through his shadow, and is about to let off a piercing blood style attack at him, but it ends up missing. Sukuna also has the ability to adapt to any and all phenomena when he uses the Maharaga wheel on top of his own head, and we saw him do this in the fight against Yorozu and in the fight with Gojo. We know how the adaptation works. If it receives a single attack, then the adaptation process begins, and if you keep hitting Sukuna with the same attack over and over, then the adaptation process will speed up and it will eventually adapt to the attack, whatever it is. And it is important that it notes that this ability can adapt to any and all phenomena. We saw the wheel adapt to Sukuna's slashes back when Sukuna fought Maharaga. We saw it adapt to Yorozu's Domain Expansion, which was her creation technique. We also saw Maharaga adapt to Gojo's abilities, which eventually led to Sukuna being able to cut Gojo through infinity. So this adaptation ability is undoubtedly, arguably the most broken ability in the entirety of Jujutsu Kaisen. No matter who you fight, no matter what they use, as long as you have Maharaga's will above you and you don't die outright to the attack the first time, then you will adapt to it. And I do want to put emphasis on that. You can't die to the first attack that you're trying to adapt to because you didn't give the wheel any time to adapt. If you can take out the wheel user the first try in attacking them, then they won't have time to adapt to it. You just kill them outright, which is how Sukuna was able to kill Maharaga with the flame arrow. But if you mess up and hit them with a few of the same attack, they're probably going to adapt to it, because not only are you hitting them with the same attack, which speeds up the process, you're giving them more time for the adaptation process to end. And once the wheel has adapted to your ability, you've pretty much lost the fight. We also know that in this form, it's not just Maharaga. Sukuna has access to the other 10 shadows, and although individually they're not all as powerful as Maharaga, he can combine the other shadows into one large beast, and we saw him do that in the form of Agito. We see that Agito is just the combination of Nue, the Great Serpent, the Tiger, and the Tranquil Deer. Now, we do still know that Agito is not as powerful as Maharaga is. Even Gojo says that Agito didn't fit in with those other two, which is why Gojo targeted Agito and killed it with a single max output blue attack. Agito is still a very powerful Shikigami who wields the abilities of Nue, the Serpent, the Tiger, and the Deer. Sukuna showed us some abilities that we hadn't seen before in the 10 Shadows technique in the fight with the Yorozu. The Ox that actually got more powerful as it traveled a larger distance, and the Deer that had positive energy so it negated curse techniques. So Sukuna is able to use not only Maharaga, Agito, and the ability to move through shadows. We also know that he is able to make these 10 shadows stronger than we saw with Megami, and that should be obvious, but the power discrepancy between Sukuna summons and Megami summons is massive. We saw whenever Megami was able to use Nue, even though Nue was larger than Megami himself, it wasn't that much larger than Megami, maybe the size of 2 Megamis. But we saw when Sukuna used Nue was bigger than the building that it was standing on, and it rained down lightning from above. So we know that Sukuna has the ability to make these shadows very, very powerful, much more powerful than we ever saw with Megami. Now, although all of these abilities sound great, you have to keep in mind that Sukuna was not able to use any of his shrine attacks while he was using Maharaga's wheel. So if you notice, during the Gojo fight, he had to resort to mainly just punching and kicking while he was waiting on the wheel to adapt to infinity. In order to have more offense, we did see him actually physically manifest Maharaga as well as Agito, which would give him more offense while the wheel was adapting, because like I said, he was only able to punch and kick really. We also saw him use that piercing blood attack, but that's not like a super powerful attack in itself. We saw that it was able to penetrate Gojo's skin, but it was mainly just like a flesh wound. One thing Sukuna can do that we never saw Megami do was partially summon the shadows and keeping their form unstable. Now what this means is that, remember when he used the dogs against Yorozu and they looked weird? This is because he didn't fully manifest them through the 10 Shadows technique. He made their form unstable so that even if they were destroyed, he would still be able to use them in the future. Because remember, if you fully destroy a shadow in the 10 Shadows technique, it just goes away and you can't use it anymore. But since Sukuna summoned these shadows in this specific way, even if they were destroyed, he would be able to use them again. And it is also important to highlight that although people mainly focus on Maharaga for his adaptation ability, Maharaga is extremely fast and extremely powerful and durable. We saw that Maharaga was able to take 2 black flashes from Gojo and be fine, and we also see that Maharaga is able to be used in a sort of surprise attack. Remember when Gojo hit Sukuna in the stomach with a black flash and Sukuna's eyes turned white as if he had been knocked out? We saw that Maharaga came out of these shadows from nowhere, trapped Gojo's legs in the shadows, grabbed him, and cut him across the stomach. So we see that here, Maharaga can be used as sort of a surprise attack. He can sink your legs into the shadow so you're unable to move, and then he can just cut you while you're basically paralyzed. So we've pretty much gone over everything that Sukuna can do in his Megami 10 Shadows form. He can move through the shadows for himself and get up on the opponent without them noticing. He can use Maharaga and Agito and any of the other summons if he needed to. He can partially manifest any of the 10 shadows so that even if they are destroyed, they don't go away. Sukuna can even put Maharaga's wheel on top of his own head, so he can have Maharaga already be adapting to something even though Maharaga isn't out there himself. So now that we have talked about all of the powers that Sukuna has displayed in his 10 Shadows form, let's compare these abilities to what Sukuna can do in his current state, which is just his prime body. So we know that with his shrine technique, Sukuna now has the capability of cutting basically anything. Kashimo calls this new slice that Sukuna has the slash that cuts the world. That is the name Kashimo gave this slash. Now, the reason this slash is so powerful is because it can cut anybody no matter what type of defense they have. Sukuna now has the ability to cut space itself, so it doesn't matter how durable you are. If he uses this slash attack, he will just cut clean through you like you're not even there. Now, the way he is able to cut quote-unquote space itself is because instead of targeting the opponent, he targets the space in which the opponent exists. There's a long explanation in the fight with Gojo, but I'll give the short and easy to understand explanation for how Sukuna can cut space now. So essentially, after Maharaga adapted to Infinity, Maharaga found a way to cut through Infinity. And this way was to not target Gojo, but to target the space in which Gojo existed. So imagine it like this. We saw that Sukuna cut Gojo on his waist. But normally, whenever Sukuna attacks somebody, he sends slashes flying at the waist. But this is different. Sukuna no longer was doing this. He wasn't just sending slashes flying towards Gojo's waist anymore. This time, he wasn't targeting Gojo's waist. The thing that Sukuna was targeting was now the space in which Gojo's waist existed. So by cutting the space in which Gojo's waist existed, Sukuna was able to cut Gojo's waist. All this means is that it doesn't matter how durable you are, it doesn't matter how hard of a punch you can take, or even if you can take as many of Sukuna's normal slashes as you want to. The moment Sukuna uses this new world-cutting slash, you will be cut in half because it's cutting the space in which you exist. Now, although this world-cutting slash is very broken, at least it's not an instant hitting attack. We see that Kashimo was able to somewhat dodge it the first time Kashimo was hit by it, as it only hit his hand and didn't actually, cut Kashimo himself in half. But you see, Sukuna just changed up his whole playstyle right after he saw Kashimo do this. Once he saw that Kashimo dodged the normal slash, which is just a singular slash flying forward, Sukuna sent an entire web of world-cutting slashes towards Kashimo. The damage was so severe, Gege didn't even show it. After we saw this web of slashes going towards Kashimo, we just got skipped to a spiritual landscape where Kashimo was just in the afterlife, sort of like what happened to Jogo. Now, there are some pretty insane statements about this form of Sukuna, and I just need to make sure that all of you guys have to hear what the narrator said about this form of Sukuna. Even while making hand signs, two hands are free. Able to chant incantations with no strain on his heart or lungs. As a sorcerer, there is no greater advantage than having twice the number of arms and mouths. Although Sukuna's body takes on this dysplastic form, not a single one of his bodily functions are hindered. Now, it's insane here that it is saying that there is no greater advantage, and we also saw how Kashimo earlier in this chapter said that this form of Sukuna was perfect, and even remarked at how beautiful this form of Sukuna was because of what Sukuna is capable of. What this page here is saying when it says that there is no greater advantage than having twice the number of arms and mouths is because Sukuna is able to make hand signs while having two of his other hands free. These hand signs are used for incantations along with the extra mouth that he has, which means that he can essentially make hand signs and chant incantations while still having two arms free and, well, his own mouth free as well. And we know that his world slash needs incantations and hand signs, so in this form, he's able to get that slash off much more efficiently. Even excluding the world slash, we see that the other shrine abilities were extremely broken as well. Whenever Sukuna is up close on somebody, we see that he normally grabs them and just makes a slash of webs on their body. He did this to Higuruma, and he also did this to Yuji in chapter 247, so he can do a lot of damage by just placing his hand on you. We also know that Sukuna with these shrine abilities is a beautiful range fighter because he can send slashes flying at an extremely far range. We see in the fight that he had against Maharaga, he actually cut a plane that was flying in the sky. Unlike the 10 Shadows in his shrine state, we see that Sukuna doesn't really have a large abundance of different abilities, just the dismantle, the cleave, and even the flame arrow, which he doesn't use that often, but we might see the reappearance of in the upcoming fights. The fire arrow is an arrow that burns people down to their bone marrow, as it says in the fanbook, and it was even used to defeat Maharaga in just one hit. Now, I don't have to do too much explaining for this Sukuna section because the shrine section of this video is basically Sukuna doing everything we've seen him do throughout the entire series, except he now has this new world-cutting slash that can cut space itself. But for just a quick synopsis, in this form, Sukuna has Dismantle, which is just slashes he sends out flying normally. He also has Cleave, which are slashes that adjust to the person's overall curse energy amount. He also has this new world-cutting slash that cuts space itself, and the flame arrow that we saw in the fight with Jogo in Maharaga. Now that both sides of Sukuna have been covered, the 10 Shadows side of Sukuna and the Shrine side, let's compare the two and see which one is stronger. I want to say first out that undoubtedly Shrine is better offensively. Because Sukuna has these 2 extra arms and an extra mouth, he is able to chant these incantations and make these hand signs for the world-cutting slash far faster than he would be able to in any other form. Shrine also allows for more damaging attacks with further range, as we saw the slashes travel farther than any 10 Shadows ability. Like I said earlier, Sukuna was able to hit a plane out of the sky with one of his slashes, which just shows the great range that he has with his Shrine technique. He is also able to do damage faster with his Shrine technique because he can just sort of spam slashes over and over again. But even with all of this in mind, this is all offense. In terms of defense, I think that 10 Shadows has Shrine beat. He's able to adapt and overcome any and all phenomena with Maharaga's wheel. And with the ability to summon both Maharaga and Agito, it's very hard to hit somebody like that with Maharaga and Agito protecting him and also attacking you themselves. So I would say in terms of defense, you can't just use the same attack on the guy over and over again if he eventually just adapts to it or has Maharaga adapt to it. And although you might be thinking, well, you know, this adaptation can be used for offense as well, which is true, it can. But so far, there's no greater offensive attack we've seen Sukuna do than his world-cutting Space Slash, which is a part of his Shrine arsenal, so I have to give attack to Shrine and defense to the 10 Shadows abilities. I would also say that the 10 Shadows has more versatility if you're talking about an arsenal to attack somebody, but you don't really need all of that versatility if you can just use a world-cutting Space Slash. So in terms of range, destructive power, and overall offense, I would say that the Shrine is better than the 10 Shadows technique, but in terms of defense and overall versatility, I think that the 10 Shadows technique is better. And before I give my answer on which form of Sukuna I think is stronger, I just want to say that I completely understand both sides. No matter if you say the 10 Shadows Sukuna is stronger or the Shrine current Sukuna is stronger, I understand completely because there are very good arguments for both sides. But given everything that I've said in this video, I would give the edge to the current Shrine Sukuna with his prime body, because we see now that this form of Sukuna, like Kashimo says, is perfect. He calls this form of Sukuna beautiful even though he's seen Megami Sukuna. We also saw that the narrator said that there's no greater advantage than this body that Sukuna has now. So for those reasons, I think that although this comparison is very close, I would give the edge to this current prime body Sukuna that we are witnessing now. And I said at the start that I would ask you the same question at the end. Now you've heard my answer, but like I said, I think that either answer is completely reasonable. So after hearing everything, I do just want to know, what form of Sukuna do you think is stronger? Let me know in the comments below, and I just want to thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. And if you enjoyed, then I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as I do post on different topics that you guys give me and a few that I come up with on my own. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.